The wedding had been over for a month when the photographer called me with a warning that made my blood run cold. She told me to come alone, and under no circumstances was I to tell my daughter. I thought she was overreacting. I had no idea that a single set of photographs was about to destroy everything I believed about my family. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are listening in the comments. The phone rang just as I reached for my first sip of coffee. It was an ordinary Tuesday morning, or at least it should have been. The Arizona sun was already pouring through the windows of my home office, warming the polished hardwood floor. Quarterly reports covered my desk, and my laptop displayed inventory numbers from Reynolds Home Supply, a business I'd spent 4 decades building from a single neighborhood hardware store into 3 successful locations across Phoenix. At 68 years old, I finally had the kind of life I'd once only dreamed about. The company was stable. The mortgage had been paid off years ago. My daughters were adults. Or so I believed. Normally, I ignored calls from unknown numbers, but something made me answer. "Mr. Reynolds." The woman's voice sounded shaky. "This is Carolyn Thornton. I was the photographer at your daughter Emily's wedding." I immediately recognized her name. "Yes, of course. Is everything all right?" There was a long pause. "No, sir, not really." My fingers tightened around the phone. "I need you to come to my studio tomorrow morning. Please come alone." A knot formed in my stomach. Is something wrong with the wedding album? I wish it were that simple. Her breathing grew heavier. "I found something while editing the photographs, something I don't think your daughter should hear until you've seen it yourself." Every instinct inside me screamed that this conversation wasn't normal. "What exactly did you find?" "I'm sorry, I can't explain it over the phone." Another pause. "Please don't mention this to anyone, especially not to your daughter." The line went silent before I could ask another question. I slowly lowered the phone. For the first time in years, my peaceful office suddenly felt unfamiliar. 1 month earlier, I'd proudly walked my eldest daughter, Emily, down the aisle. Her smile had convinced me every dollar I'd spent had been worth it. The ceremony at the Desert Botanical Garden. The elegant reception. The live orchestra. The custom floral arrangements. Nearly $70,000 had disappeared in a single weekend. And I'd gladly spent every cent because I believed I was giving my daughter the perfect beginning. Now a stranger had just suggested that something hidden inside those memories could change everything. "Dad." My youngest daughter, Rachel, interrupted my thoughts as she walked into the office holding her phone. "Did you forget what we talked about?" I blinked. "What?" "My car." She rolled her eyes dramatically. "I can't keep driving that old Honda. Melissa just bought a brand new Lexus, and I'm honestly embarrassed pulling up anywhere." Rachel was 31 years old. She'd moved back into my guest house 4 years earlier after her divorce. "Just until I get back on my feet," she'd promised. 4 years later, she was still there, along with her boyfriend, Tyler. Neither of them paid rent. Neither of them seemed to think they should. "We'll talk about it later," I replied quietly. Her expression changed instantly. "You always say later." "I've got work to finish." She crossed her arms. "Dad, it's not even that expensive for you." "Not expensive." Funny how people spending someone else's money always said that. "I said later." She sighed loudly before walking away. Seconds later, I heard the guest house door slam. I leaned back in my chair and stared out the window toward the backyard. The swimming pool shimmered beneath the desert sun. Beyond it stood the guest house I'd built years ago. Originally, I'd imagined grandchildren staying there during summer vacations. Instead, it had become a permanent residence for 2 adults who treated my generosity like an entitlement. The rest of the afternoon crawled by. I reviewed invoices, signed payroll approvals, answered emails, but my concentration never lasted more than a few minutes. My mind kept returning to Carolyn's trembling voice. Something I found in the photographs. What could possibly be hidden inside wedding pictures? By evening, another surprise arrived. Emily pulled into the driveway in her silver Mercedes. She stepped inside carrying the same bright smile she'd worn on her wedding day. "Dad!" She hugged me warmly. I was nearby and thought I'd stop in. I smiled back, though something about the day made it harder than usual. After a few minutes of small talk, she casually crossed one leg over the other. "Actually," her smile became carefully rehearsed. "Daniel and I found our dream house." "That's wonderful." "It is." She paused. "We just need a little help with the down payment." I waited. $40,000. She said it so naturally it sounded less like a request and more like an expectation. My heartbeat slowed. 40,000. Only hours earlier, Rachel wanted a new luxury car. Now Emily wanted enough money to buy a house. Neither had asked how I was doing. Neither had asked whether I could afford it. They simply assumed I'd say yes. I looked at my daughter for a long moment. "I'll think about it." Her smile faded just enough for me to notice. "I hope you don't take too long." She stood, kissed my cheek, and walked toward the door. "We really don't want to lose this house." As I watched her taillights disappear down the driveway, Carolyn's phone call echoed in my mind once again. Tomorrow morning, I would finally learn what she'd discovered inside those wedding photographs. And deep down, I already feared that whatever waited for me would change my family forever. But nothing could have prepared me for what appeared on Carolyn's computer screen the next morning. One photograph, taken just 2 hours before the ceremony, would expose a secret that no father should ever have to see. The next morning, I left the house before sunrise. I didn't want Rachel asking where I was going, and I certainly didn't want Tyler making one of his sarcastic comments about my schedule. The silence during the drive felt almost unnatural. Every traffic light seemed to last longer than usual, and every mile brought me closer to whatever Carolyn had discovered. Her photography studio sat inside a renovated brick warehouse in Phoenix's Arts District. Large glass windows displayed elegant wedding portraits, smiling families, and graduation photos, images that celebrated life's happiest moments. Ironically, I was about to walk inside and watch one of mine fall apart. Carolyn opened the door before I could knock. She looked exhausted. Dark circles rested beneath her eyes, and she forced a nervous smile. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Reynolds." I nodded. "You sounded frightened on the phone." "I've barely slept since I found it." She quietly locked the front door behind me and guided me toward a small editing room. The space was filled with computer monitors, framed photographs, and professional camera equipment. A single desk lamp illuminated the room, making it feel more like an interrogation room than a photography studio. "Would you like some coffee?" she asked. I shook my head. "I'd rather know why I'm here." She took a slow breath before sitting in front of her computer. "I debated whether I should even call you." "Why?" "Because what I'm about to show you could change your family forever." A chill crept across my shoulders. "Please, just show me." She clicked her mouse, and dozens of wedding photographs appeared on the screen. Emily walking down the aisle. Daniel waiting at the altar with a smile. Guests applauding. My daughters laughing together. Everything looked exactly as I remembered. "These are the final edited images," Carolyn explained. "The ones everyone will eventually see." She opened another folder. "But these were never meant to be seen." My heartbeat quickened. This folder contains the raw photographs taken while I was testing my camera before the ceremony officially began. The next image appeared. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. A quiet terrace behind the reception hall. Decorations still being arranged. Morning sunlight stretching across the stone floor. Then I saw him. Daniel, still wearing his tuxedo, though the jacket wasn't fully buttoned yet. He wasn't alone. A woman with shoulder-length auburn hair stood inches from him. His hands rested gently around her waist. Before I could process it, Carolyn clicked to the next photograph. The distance between them disappeared. Their lips met. It wasn't a brief greeting. It wasn't an awkward misunderstanding. It was the unmistakable kiss of two people who already knew each other far too well. I felt every muscle in my body go rigid. No, the word escaped my mouth almost as a whisper. Carolyn didn't speak. She simply opened another image. Different angle. Same couple. Daniel's eyes were closed. His expression was relaxed. Comfortable. Like there wasn't a wedding waiting for him just 2 hours later. Are you sure these were taken that morning? I finally asked. She nodded immediately. I checked the metadata several times because I couldn't believe it myself. She enlarged the information panel beside the photograph. There, the timestamp, 10:12 a.m. The wedding ceremony had started shortly after noon. My stomach turned. So this happened less than 2 hours before he married my daughter. Yes, and you're certain these files haven't been altered? I've worked as a photographer for nearly 20 years, Mr. Reynolds. Original RAW files contain digital information that is almost impossible to fake without leaving evidence. She clicked through several technical screens showing timestamps, GPS coordinates, and camera data. Everything matches the venue. I stared at the screen. There wasn't just one picture. There were 6. Each one removed any possibility of misunderstanding. Then something else caught my attention. The woman's left hand. A wedding ring. Not an engagement ring. A wedding band. My pulse pounded in my ears. Do you know who she is? Carolyn slowly shook her head. I checked the guest list. Nothing. No, either she wasn't invited, or she never attended the ceremony. The room felt impossibly small. Questions flooded my mind faster than I could answer them. Who was she? Why would Daniel go through with the wedding after this? And if he loved someone else, why marry Emily at all? Carolyn reached into a desk drawer and carefully placed a small flash drive on the table. I copied every original file, including the timestamps and technical data. She pushed it toward me. I believe this belongs with you now. I picked up the drive, feeling its surprising weight in my hand. It was only a few grams of plastic and metal. Yet somehow, it felt heavy enough to shatter an entire family. As I drove home with the flash drive in my pocket, one question refused to leave my mind. If Daniel never intended to be faithful, then what was the real reason he married my daughter? The answer would lead me to a far darker scheme than I could have ever imagined. The drive home felt longer than it should have. The flash drive Carolyn had handed me rested in my shirt pocket, but it felt like a brick against my chest. Every time I stopped at a red light, my mind replayed those photographs. Daniel wasn't confused. He wasn't drunk. He wasn't making a reckless mistake. He looked calm, comfortable, like kissing another woman just hours before his wedding was the most natural thing in the world. When I pulled into my driveway, everything looked exactly as I'd left it. The guest house sat quietly beyond the pool. Rachel's SUV was parked outside. Tyler's aging sedan leaned slightly to one side, as if it had given up years ago. Nothing had changed, except me. I stepped through the front door. Without even looking away from the television, Tyler called out from my recliner. Hey, Frank, could you grab me a soda while you're in the kitchen? For the first time in years. I didn't answer. I simply walked past him. A moment later, Rachel shouted from upstairs. Dad, don't forget we need to talk about the car this weekend. Again, I kept walking. Inside my office, I closed the door and locked it. The click echoed through the room. I sat behind my desk and placed the flash drive beside my laptop. For several minutes, I simply stared at it. Then another thought entered my mind. If Daniel had been living a double life before the wedding, could the wedding itself have been part of something bigger? I opened the spreadsheet I'd created while planning Emily's wedding. Every receipt, every payment, every deposit, nearly $70,000. Venue, catering, flowers, live band, photography, luxury transportation. I remembered how excited Emily had been while planning every detail. At the time, I'd been happy to help. Now I looked at those numbers differently. Then another memory surfaced. Emily had insisted they didn't want traditional wedding gifts. No kitchen appliances, she'd laughed. No fancy dinner sets. Cash would help us so much more while we're starting our life together. At the time, it had sounded practical. Now it sounded calculated. I reached for a legal pad and began writing. Wedding expenses. Cash gifts. Personal check from me. Business associates. Family friends. The memories came one after another. I clearly remembered watching guests place envelopes into the decorated gift box throughout the reception. By the end of the evening, it had been overflowing. A week later, Emily had called me. "Dad, can you believe everyone gave us almost $50,000? She'd sounded thrilled. I wrote the number down. Then another memory hit me. My longtime business partner, Michael Carter. During the reception, he'd pulled Daniel aside. "Welcome to the family," he'd said with a smile before slipping him an envelope. Later, Michael had quietly told me it contained a $15,000 check. He believed he was helping a young couple build their future. I slowly added another figure to the page. The total made my stomach tighten. Between my wedding expenses, my personal gift, and the cash they'd received from guests, Daniel and Emily had walked away with well over $100,000 connected to that wedding. I leaned back in my chair. Something didn't fit. If Daniel was already involved with another woman, why go through with such an expensive ceremony? Why smile through hundreds of photographs? Why exchange vows he clearly didn't intend to honor? The answer couldn't simply be love. Because love wasn't standing on that terrace kissing someone else. I barely slept that night. Just after sunrise, another question pushed me out of bed. Money always leaves a trail. If I wanted answers, that was where I needed to start. At 9 o'clock sharp, I walked into the downtown branch where my company had banked for nearly 20 years. The branch manager, Patricia Collins, greeted me with a warm smile. "Good morning, Mr. Reynolds. What can I do for you today?" I just wanted to verify something. She invited me into her office. "What do you need?" "My wedding gift check to Emily. The $20,000 one." I nodded. "I'd like to confirm it cleared properly." She typed for a few moments before turning the monitor slightly. It cleared without any issues. I pretended to study the screen casually. It was deposited into a joint account. "Yes." She clicked another tab. The account had actually been opened about 2 months before the wedding. 2 months. Long before the vows. Long before the honeymoon. I forced a polite smile. Young couples certainly plan ahead these days. She laughed. "They certainly do." But as I walked back to my truck, one thought refused to leave me. People in love plan weddings. People running a business. Plan bank accounts. But when I returned home later that afternoon, I accidentally overheard a phone conversation between my 2 daughters, one that would reveal a shocking plan far more disturbing than Daniel's betrayal, and prove that the wedding had never been what it seemed. I barely remembered the drive home from the bank. Patricia's words echoed in my mind over and over. The account was opened about 2 months before the wedding. Most newly engaged couples eventually open a joint account. There was nothing illegal about that. But the timing bothered me. Daniel had already been planning his finances long before he exchanged vows with my daughter. When I pulled into my driveway, the house looked unusually quiet. Tyler's car was still parked outside the guest house, but Rachel's SUV was gone. I hoped that meant I could finally think in peace. I entered through the garage and quietly closed the door behind me. Just as I started toward my office, voices drifted downstairs from the second floor. Rachel. She was talking on the phone. Normally, I would have continued walking. But then I heard a name that stopped me cold. Emily. I froze where I stood. The hallway carried every word. I don't know, Rachel said with a nervous laugh. Dad's acting different lately. A brief pause. Then she laughed again. But don't worry. Tyler thinks we can stretch this out for another 5 or 6 months. My heartbeat slowed. By then, she continued, he'll probably just buy us a condo to get us out of the house. I felt my fingers tighten against the hallway wall. Then Emily's voice came through the speakerphone, loud enough for me to hear. Perfect. She sounded completely relaxed. I only need another couple of months, too. Another pause. Then she said something that made my knees feel weak. I'm going to file for divorce. Silence filled the hallway. Rachel laughed. So you're really doing it? Of course. Emily's voice remained calm. The wedding gifts are already in our account. Once everything's settled, Daniel and I already agreed on how we'll divide the money. I stopped breathing. Rachel lowered her voice slightly. So everything's still on track. Exactly. Emily chuckled. The marriage just needed to last long enough to look believable. The words struck me harder than any punch ever could. She continued speaking. I'll keep acting like the perfect wife for a little longer. After that, we'll both move on. Rachel laughed even louder. And Dad, Emily answered without hesitation. Keep him distracted. My chest tightened. If he starts asking questions, Emily continued, make him think you're struggling financially. Rachel sighed dramatically. Already started. Good. I asked him for a luxury car yesterday. And he didn't say yes. He always does eventually. Another laugh. Then I'll ask again next week. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. These weren't strangers. These were my daughters. The little girls I'd taught to ride bicycles. The girls whose scraped knees I'd bandaged. The girls I'd worked endless hours to provide for. Now they were discussing me like I was nothing more than an account balance. Emily spoke again. I'll ask him about the house down payment in a few days. Rachel laughed. 40,000 is a lot. Not for Dad. Another pause. He'll give it to me. Her confidence wasn't hopeful. It was absolute. Because for years, I'd never said no. I slowly stepped backward, careful not to make a sound. My heart pounded so loudly I was afraid they'd hear it. Once inside my office, I quietly locked the door. For several minutes, I simply stood there. The flash drive from Carolyn rested beside my computer. The wedding budget spreadsheet remained open. Now another piece of the puzzle had fallen into place. Daniel's affair wasn't the only betrayal. Emily had never planned on building a marriage. Rachel had never planned on leaving my property. Everything revolved around money. My money. I sat down and opened my laptop. This wasn't something I could solve with another family conversation. Not anymore. I typed 3 words into the search bar. Estate protection attorney. Several firms appeared. One name immediately caught my attention. Robert Mackenzie. Over 25 years specializing in estate planning, asset protection, and property law. Exactly what I needed. Without allowing myself time to second-guess the decision, I picked up the phone. His receptionist answered on the second ring. Mackenzie Legal Group, how may I help you? I need the earliest appointment available. She checked the schedule. Tomorrow morning at 9. I'll be there. After hanging up, I leaned back in my chair and stared out the office window. Outside, everything looked exactly the same. The pool sparkled beneath the afternoon sun. The guest house stood peacefully beyond it. Rachel and Tyler still believed they had months before anything would change. Emily probably believed I'd soon write another check. None of them realized something had shifted inside me. For the first time in years, I wasn't thinking like a father. I was thinking like a businessman who had just discovered the biggest fraud of his life. Tomorrow, I would sit across from an attorney and learn exactly how to protect everything I'd spent 40 years building. And once the paperwork began, there would be no turning back. The next morning, I arrived 15 minutes early. Robert Mackenzie's office occupied the 23rd floor of a modern glass building overlooking downtown Phoenix. The lobby was spotless, with polished marble floors and walls decorated with framed legal awards. It was the kind of place that inspired confidence the moment you stepped inside. A receptionist greeted me with a warm smile. "Good morning, Mr. Reynolds. Mr. Mackenzie is expecting you." I thanked her and followed her down a quiet hallway. When I entered his office, Robert Mackenzie stood to shake my hand. He looked to be in his late 50s, with silver hair at his temples and the calm expression of someone who had spent decades solving difficult problems. "Please have a seat." I settled into the leather chair across from his desk. "What brings you here today, Mr. Reynolds?" For a moment, I wasn't sure where to begin. Then I placed the flash drive Carolyn had given me on his desk. About a month ago, I paid nearly $70,000 for my daughter's wedding. He nodded, waiting patiently. 2 days ago, the wedding photographer contacted me. She accidentally captured photographs of my son-in-law kissing another woman less than 2 hours before the ceremony. His expression became serious. I continued. "Yesterday, I overheard my 2 daughters discussing a plan. I explained everything. The photographs, the hidden affair, the joint bank account opened before the wedding, Emily's conversation about filing for divorce after collecting the wedding gifts, Rachel's plan to continue living in my guest house until I eventually bought her a condo." When I finished, silence filled the office. Mackenzie leaned back in his chair and folded his hands. "In my profession," he said quietly, "I've learned that people often reveal who they truly are when money is involved." He looked directly at me. "And from what you've told me, your family has already revealed their intentions." I nodded slowly. I don't know what hurts more, the betrayal, or realizing how long it may have been happening. He opened a legal pad and wrote several notes. "Let's address the immediate problem first." He looked up. "Your younger daughter and her boyfriend are living in your guest house." "Yes." "Do they pay rent?" "No." "Do you have a written lease?" "Never did." He made another note. "That simplifies things." "What do you mean?" "They're guests." He slid a legal handbook across the desk. "Without a lease agreement, you have every legal right to ask them to leave. Even after 4 years. "Yes." "As long as proper notice is given, the law is on your side." A strange feeling settled over me. Relief. For the first time in days, I realized I wasn't trapped. Mackenzie continued. "I recommend serving them with a formal 30-day notice. If they refuse to leave after that, we begin eviction proceedings." His confidence was reassuring. Then he changed the subject. "You also mentioned protecting your assets. Everything I've built. My business. My savings. My home. I don't want any of it manipulated after I'm gone." Mackenzie nodded. "Then we should create an irrevocable trust." He noticed my puzzled expression. "Think of it as placing your assets inside a secure vault. You maintain control during your lifetime, but once it's established, it becomes extremely difficult for anyone to challenge your wishes. So they couldn't pressure me into changing things later." "Exactly." He turned his computer monitor toward me and showed a basic trust structure. "This protects your house, your business, your investments. It also allows you to decide exactly who receives what." I stared at the screen. For years, I'd assumed my daughters would naturally inherit everything. Now, I wasn't sure they deserved any of it. Mackenzie let the silence linger. Finally, he spoke. "I need to ask you something." "What is it?" "If you move forward with this, He paused carefully. There's a good chance your relationship with your daughters will never recover. The words hung heavily between us. I thought about Rachel laughing upstairs. I thought about Emily calmly discussing her fake marriage. I remembered Daniel kissing another woman. Then I answered, I don't think I'm the one who broke this family. Mackenzie slowly nodded. I believe you're right. He reached into a drawer and removed several documents. We can begin today. I signed each page carefully. Engagement agreement. Estate planning authorization. Draft instructions for the trust. When the final signature was complete, Mackenzie gathered the paperwork into a neat stack. I'll have the eviction notices prepared within 48 hours. And the trust will begin transferring everything immediately. As I stood to leave, he shook my hand once more. You've spent 40 years building your life, Mr. Reynolds. His grip tightened slightly. It's time to protect it. I walked back to the elevator feeling lighter than I had in weeks. For the first time since Carolyn's phone call, I had a plan. What I didn't realize was that my family was already planning their next move. And within days, the first battle would begin inside my own home. In the next part, I finally served Rachel and Tyler with the eviction notices. Their reactions were exactly what I expected, but the phone call Rachel made afterward revealed they were already preparing a desperate counterattack. 2 days later, Robert Mackenzie called just after breakfast. The paperwork is ready, he said. You can pick it up this morning. I'll be there. Within an hour, I was back in his office. He handed me a large manila envelope containing 2 official notices. One was addressed to Rachel, the other to Tyler. They each need their own copy, Mackenzie explained. Hand them over personally if possible. Keep your emotions out of it. Don't argue. Don't negotiate. I nodded. And if they refuse to leave? They have 30 days to vacate. If they ignore the notice, we'll move to the next legal step. I slipped the documents into my briefcase. As I drove home, my hands tightened around the steering wheel. This wasn't how I'd imagined spending my retirement. I wasn't preparing birthday gifts or planning family vacations. I was carrying eviction papers for my own daughter. When I pulled into the driveway, Tyler was washing Rachel's SUV. At least he appeared to be. Most of the water seemed to be landing on the driveway instead of the vehicle. He looked up and waved casually. Morning, Frank. I simply nodded and walked inside. Rachel was in the kitchen making coffee. She smiled the moment she saw me. Perfect timing. She reached for her phone. I found the Lexus I was telling you about. Want to see the pictures? No. She looked surprised. I actually need to speak with you. Her smile faded. What about? Let's sit down. A few minutes later, Tyler joined us in the dining room. He looked relaxed, leaning back in his chair with a mug of coffee. Neither of them had any idea what was coming. I removed the envelope from my briefcase. Rachel frowned. What's that? I placed 2 documents on the table. You've both been officially notified. Tyler picked up the first page. Rachel grabbed the second. The silence lasted only a few seconds. Then Rachel's eyes widened. What is this? It's a 30-day notice. Tyler laughed. This isn't funny. It isn't supposed to be. Rachel looked from the paper to my face. Dad, are you serious? Yes. Her voice immediately changed. Where are we supposed to go? That's something you'll need to figure out. Tyler pushed his chair back. Hold on. He pointed toward the guest house. We've lived here for 4 years. I know. So you can't just throw us out. I've already spoken with my attorney. The room fell silent. You talked to a lawyer? Yes. Rachel stared at me in disbelief. You actually hired a lawyer against your own family. I hired someone to protect my property. Her eyes filled with tears almost instantly. I can't believe you'd do this to me. For years, those tears would have worked. Today, they didn't. I've supported you for 4 years. I never charged you rent. I paid the utilities. I paid for repairs. I paid for groceries more times than I can count. I kept my voice calm. I've done everything I could. Rachel shook her head. So you're just abandoning me? No. I'm asking 2 healthy adults to become independent. Tyler slammed his coffee mug onto the table. This is because of the car, isn't it? No. Then what? I looked directly at him. It's because this arrangement was never meant to be permanent. Rachel stood abruptly. This isn't fair. You promised you'd always help us. I have helped for years, but helping someone shouldn't mean supporting them forever. She crumpled the notice in her hand. I'm calling Emily. She stormed out of the room, disappearing toward the guest house. Tyler followed close behind, muttering under his breath. A moment later, I heard the guest house door slam. Then another. Then muffled voices. The conversation grew louder. Rachel wasn't trying to hide it. She wanted me to hear. Dad's lost his mind. A pause. No, he's serious. Another pause. Then her voice became quieter. What do we do now? I couldn't hear Emily's reply. But I didn't need to. Rachel suddenly shouted. No, don't come today. Another pause. Tomorrow. She looked through the kitchen window directly at me. Fine. She ended the call. For several long seconds, we simply stared at each other through the glass. There was no sadness in her expression anymore. The tears were gone. In their place was anger. Cold. Calculated. Determined. That evening, my phone remained unusually quiet. No messages from Emily. No apology from Rachel. No attempt to talk. The silence itself felt like a warning. They weren't giving up. They were planning. And somehow, I knew tomorrow wouldn't be about reconciliation. It would be about confrontation. The next afternoon, Emily arrived unexpectedly with Daniel by her side. They claimed they wanted to clear the air, but within minutes, the conversation took a shocking turn, and they made a demand that proved this had never been about family. The following afternoon, a black SUV rolled into my driveway. I looked through my office window and immediately recognized it. Emily. She climbed out of the passenger seat while Daniel stepped out from behind the wheel. Rachel and Tyler emerged from the guest house almost instantly, as if they'd been waiting for them. Within seconds, all 4 of them were walking toward my front door together. Not individually. As a team. I opened the door before they could knock. Emily forced a smile. Dad, can we talk? I stepped aside without saying a word. Everyone gathered in the living room. The atmosphere felt less like a family visit and more like a business meeting. Rachel folded her arms. Emily sat beside Daniel on the couch. Tyler remained standing, leaning against the wall. Finally, Emily broke the silence. Rachel told me about the eviction notice. I'm sure she did. She sighed dramatically. Dad, this isn't like you. I remained quiet. Daniel leaned forward. We're all just worried about you. I looked at him for the first time. Worried? Yes. He nodded. This decision came out of nowhere. Rachel quickly joined in. Exactly. You've always been generous. So why would you suddenly throw us out? I folded my hands together. It wasn't sudden. It was overdue. Tyler let out a sarcastic laugh. So this is really happening. Emily reached across the coffee table. Dad, maybe you're just overwhelmed. The wedding. Running the business. Getting older. Her words were carefully chosen. Not comforting. Calculated. As though she wanted me to question my own judgment. I know you're under stress, she continued softly, but making permanent decisions while emotional isn't a good idea. I couldn't help noticing Daniel quietly nodding beside her, almost as if they'd rehearsed this conversation. I've thought about it very carefully, I replied. Rachel's expression hardened. Then what exactly did we do wrong? I looked directly at her. For 4 years, you've lived on my property without paying rent. She immediately interrupted. You never asked us to. That's true, but you never offered. Silence. I continued. I paid your electric bill. I paid your water bill. I covered maintenance. I even bought groceries when things were tight. Tyler shrugged. You could afford it. There it was. Not appreciation. Expectation. I turned toward him. Do you know how many weekends I worked while my friends were on vacation? He said nothing. Do you know how many birthdays I missed building my business? Nothing. I earned everything I have. Emily tried another approach. Dad, nobody's saying you didn't. Then why do all of you act like you're entitled to it? No one answered. Instead, Daniel cleared his throat. What if we found another solution? What kind of solution? Rachel smiled hopefully. Maybe we could start paying a little rent. A few $100s. I shook my head. No. Emily frowned. What if Tyler helps with maintenance around the property? Tyler looked surprised. I already do. I raised an eyebrow. Really? When was the last time you repaired something without me buying the materials? He looked away. Daniel spoke again. What Rachel really needs is more time. How much? I don't know. 6 months. A year. The answer came too quickly. Exactly as Rachel had predicted during her phone call. I leaned back in my chair. Interesting. Emily blinked. What is 6 months? Her face stiffened ever so slightly. Why is that interesting? I smiled politely. No reason. The room became noticeably quieter. They didn't realize I'd already overheard their conversation upstairs. Every excuse they offered, I'd heard before. Every argument sounded rehearsed. Finally, Rachel's voice cracked. So you're choosing money over your own family. I slowly stood. No, I'm choosing self-respect. She stared at me in disbelief. You've confused generosity with obligation. I spent years helping all of you because I wanted to. I paused, but somewhere along the way, you stopped seeing it as kindness. You started seeing it as something you deserved. No one spoke. The silence stretched for several uncomfortable seconds. Then Daniel unexpectedly stood. I think we should leave. Emily looked at him. Already. He nodded. This conversation isn't going anywhere. One by one, they walked toward the front door. Rachel was the last to leave. Before stepping outside, she turned back. This isn't over, Dad. Her voice was calm, almost emotionless. It wasn't a threat shouted in anger. It was a promise. After the door closed, I watched all 4 of them gather beside Daniel's SUV. They spoke for nearly 10 minutes before driving away. Something about their body language bothered me. No one looked defeated. If anything, they looked determined. And experience had taught me one important lesson. When people fail to manipulate you with emotions, they usually return with a different strategy. The very next morning, an unexpected visitor arrived at my front door claiming to be there for my own well-being. But within minutes, I realized my daughters had launched an entirely new plan, one that threatened not just my money, but my reputation and independence. The next morning, my doorbell rang just after 10. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened the front door, a woman in her early 40s stood on my porch wearing a navy blazer and carrying a leather folder. She offered a polite smile. "Good morning, Mr. Reynolds." "Yes, my name is Dr. Melissa Harper." She extended a business card. "I'm a licensed family counselor." I frowned. "I think you have the wrong address." "I don't believe I do." She hesitated before continuing. "Your daughters contacted my office." A cold feeling settled in my stomach. "They're concerned about you." I looked at the card in my hand. "They believe you've been acting differently over the past few weeks." I almost laughed. "So they hired a counselor. They asked if I would be willing to speak with you." I understood immediately. This wasn't about concern. It was about creating doubt. "I'm sorry you wasted your trip," I said calmly. "I'm perfectly healthy." She didn't seem offended. "I understand this may feel uncomfortable." "I'm not uncomfortable. I simply don't need counseling." She studied my face for a moment. "I've been doing this for nearly 15 years. May I tell you something?" I nodded politely. The people who truly lose touch with reality rarely question themselves. I raised an eyebrow. "And you've answered every question clearly. You've remained calm. You're not confused or disoriented." She smiled kindly. "I don't see someone who's mentally impaired." For the first time that morning, I relaxed. "I appreciate your honesty." She slipped her business card back into her folder. "I'll simply tell your daughters that I don't have any professional concerns." Before leaving, she paused. "One piece of advice." "Yes, sometimes families use the word concern when what they really mean is control." With that, she walked back to her car. I stood on the porch long after she drove away. My daughters hadn't just tried to change my mind. They'd attempted to question my judgment. If I hadn't remained calm, if I'd lost my temper, who knows what story might have been told afterward. That afternoon, my phone rang again. This time it was Robert Mackenzie. "How are things at home?" I told him about the counselor's visit. He was silent for several seconds. "I'm glad you handled it the way you did." "You think it was intentional?" "I can't prove intent," he replied carefully. "But I've seen situations where family members try to build a narrative that an older relative is making irrational decisions, so they can challenge legal documents later." Exactly. His words confirmed what I'd already suspected. "Keep documenting everything," he continued. "Every conversation, every text message, every visit. If this becomes a legal dispute, detailed records matter." "I've started a journal." "Good. And one more thing." His voice became more serious. "Do not meet with all of them alone again. If they want another family discussion, have it somewhere public or better yet, in my office." "I understand." After hanging up, I opened a notebook and began writing. The date, the time, Dr. Harper's visit, everything she had said, everything I had said. 40 years in business had taught me a simple lesson. Memories fade. Written records don't. Later that evening, Emily finally called. Her voice sounded unusually cheerful. "Dad, I've been thinking." "About what?" "This whole situation. I hate that we're fighting." "So do I." She paused. "How about dinner tomorrow night? Just family. No arguments. No pressure. I'll cook your favorite roast." For a brief moment, I almost believed her. Then I remembered the meeting in my living room. The rehearsed speeches. The counselor. The hidden phone calls. Nothing about this felt spontaneous. Still, I agreed. "All right." She sounded relieved. "Wonderful. I promise it'll be different this time." After ending the call, I stared at the silent phone in my hand. Maybe it really was a peace offering. Or maybe it was simply another carefully planned move. Either way, I intended to walk into that dinner with my eyes wide open. because instinct told me they weren't inviting me over to apologize. They were inviting me because they still believed they could change my mind. The family dinner began with smiles, laughter, and homemade food. But before dessert was served, Emily made a proposal so outrageous that every remaining doubt vanished, and I realized the entire evening had been a carefully staged trap. The following evening, I arrived at Emily and Daniel's house exactly at 6. The neighborhood was quiet, lined with newly built homes that all looked nearly identical. Emily had always dreamed of living somewhere like this. Looking at the houses now, I couldn't help but remember her request for $40,000. I wondered if she still believed she would get it. Daniel answered the door with a broad smile. "Frank, glad you made it." His cheerful tone felt forced. Emily appeared behind him, wearing an apron and carrying a casserole dish. "Dad, come in." She kissed my cheek as though nothing had happened over the past week. The dining room table was already set. Rachel and Tyler were there too. Everyone smiled. Everyone acted perfectly normal. It was almost convincing. Dinner began with harmless conversation. Emily asked about the hardware stores. Rachel talked about a television series she had been watching. Tyler joked about the Arizona heat. Daniel even complimented the roast. If someone had walked into the room, they would have thought we were an ordinary family enjoying a peaceful evening together. But beneath every smile, I could feel tension. Everyone seemed to be waiting for the right moment. It came just after dessert. Emily carefully folded her napkin and looked directly at me. "Dad, can we talk about something?" I set my coffee cup down. I figured we eventually would. She smiled. "It's actually good news." Daniel nodded enthusiastically. "We've been looking at our future." Rachel leaned forward. "And we think we found the perfect solution for everyone." I remained silent. Emily reached across the table and slid a glossy real estate brochure toward me. Inside were photographs of a luxury home with a swimming pool, guest suite, and mountain views. "It's beautiful," she said. "It is. The problem is..." She glanced at Daniel. "It's a little outside our budget." I already knew where this was going. Daniel cleared his throat. "We've been thinking about your house." "My house?" Rachel jumped in before he could continue. "It's way too big for one person." Tyler nodded. "And honestly, maintaining a place that size has to be exhausting." Emily spoke gently. "What if you sold it?" I looked at her without saying a word. She continued confidently. "You could move into a luxury retirement community. There are amazing places with golf courses, restaurants, medical staff, and security. You'd love it." Daniel smiled. "And the money from selling your house could help everyone." I finally asked the question they had all been avoiding. "Everyone." Emily didn't hesitate. "You could help us buy the new house." Rachel quickly added, "And maybe help me get a smaller place too." Tyler nodded as though it were the most reasonable idea in the world. "You'd still have plenty left over." I slowly leaned back in my chair. "So let me understand." 4 pairs of eyes watched me carefully. "You want me to sell the home your mother and I built together?" Nobody answered immediately. Emily finally spoke. "It just makes financial sense." Financial sense. Those 2 words hit me harder than I expected. This wasn't the house. It was where my daughters had learned to walk. Where Christmas mornings filled the living room with wrapping paper. Where my late wife had planted the rose bushes that still bloomed every spring. They weren't asking me to sell a building. They were asking me to erase a lifetime. Daniel broke the silence. "Frank, we're only thinking about what's best." I almost laughed. Instead, I calmly reached into my jacket pocket. "I've been thinking about what's best too." Emily frowned. "What do you mean?" I removed a small envelope and placed it on the table. Inside were several printed photographs. Carolyn had made copies before giving me the flash drive. I slid the first photograph toward Daniel. The color drained from his face instantly. Emily looked down. Her expression froze. Rachel reached over and picked up another copy. Tyler leaned closer. No one spoke. Daniel stared at the photograph of himself kissing the mysterious woman behind the wedding venue. His hands began to shake. Live. He couldn't finish the sentence. Emily slowly turned toward him. What? Her voice barely rose above a whisper. Is this? For the first time since this nightmare had begun. Someone else in the room looked genuinely surprised. And that told me something important. Emily hadn't known about the photographs. But Daniel had. As Daniel struggled to explain the impossible, another secret was about to surface, one that would prove the affair was only a small piece of a much larger deception, and force everyone at the table to reveal their true loyalties. The dining room fell into complete silence. Daniel didn't move. He didn't deny the photograph. He didn't even attempt to push it away. He simply stared at it as though hoping it would disappear. Emily looked from the picture to her husband, confusion spreading across her face. Daniel. Her voice trembled. Tell me this isn't real. He swallowed hard. I can explain. Rachel glanced nervously between them. What is there to explain? She demanded. That's clearly you. Tyler picked up another photograph from the table. There are 6 of them. He flipped through the stack one by one. Different angles. Different moments. You can't fake something like this. Daniel rubbed both hands across his face. It wasn't what it looks like. I finally spoke. Then tell us what it was. No one interrupted. Every eye remained fixed on him. He took a deep breath. Her name is Laura. Emily's expression hardened. You know her name. He immediately realized his mistake. I mean, I knew her. You knew her? Emily's voice rose. So this wasn't some random stranger. Daniel closed his eyes. We dated years ago. Before I met you. Emily stood so abruptly that her chair scraped across the hardwood floor. Years ago. She held up one of the photographs. This picture was taken on our wedding day. He looked down. She contacted me a few weeks before the ceremony. And she wanted to meet. Emily laughed bitterly. So you met your ex behind the wedding venue. It wasn't supposed to happen like that. What exactly wasn't supposed to happen? The kiss. Rachel folded her arms. You expect us to believe it just happened. Daniel looked desperate. She told me she was moving overseas. She wanted to say goodbye. Emily stared at him in disbelief. So you kissed her goodbye. She paused. Right before marrying me. He had no answer. The room remained painfully quiet. I watched the exchange carefully. Emily's reaction looked genuine. The shock in her eyes wasn't rehearsed. For the first time since this ordeal began, I believed she truly hadn't known about Daniel's affair. But that didn't erase everything else I'd overheard. She finally turned toward me. Dad, I'm so sorry you had to see this. I nodded slowly. I wish that was the only reason I was here tonight. Her eyebrows knitted together. What do you mean? I reached into my briefcase again. This time, I removed a thin folder. I've spent the last few days reviewing a few things. Daniel looked up. So have I. I placed several printed documents on the table. Bank records, wedding expense summaries, copies of the checks I'd written, guest gift estimates. I realized something. No one spoke. The wedding wasn't just expensive. It generated a lot of money. Emily frowned. Dad, I added everything together. My contribution, the cash gifts, the checks from family friends, the gifts from business associates. I tapped the total printed at the bottom of the page. More than $100,000. Rachel shifted uncomfortably. Tyler suddenly became interested in his coffee. Daniel avoided eye contact completely. I looked directly at Emily. I have one question. She nodded cautiously. When you asked me for $40,000 for a house. I paused. What happened to the money you already received? No one answered. The silence itself became an answer. Emily looked at Daniel. He looked at the floor. Rachel bit her lower lip. Finally, Emily spoke. She hesitated. We've had unexpected expenses. What kind? Medical bills. Daniel looked up quickly. And some investments didn't work out. Investments? That was new. I hadn't heard that before. What investments? Daniel opened his mouth, then closed it again. Rachel quickly interrupted. It doesn't matter. It does to me. I kept my voice calm, because every time someone in this family needs money, I looked around the table. They somehow end up asking me. Nobody challenged the statement. Nobody denied it. They simply sat there. The carefully planned dinner had completely fallen apart. Their confident smiles were gone. Their rehearsed speeches had disappeared. For the first time, they weren't controlling the conversation. I was, and judging by the uneasy looks they kept exchanging, there were still secrets none of them wanted me to uncover. As the dinner came to an awkward end, one careless comment from Tyler exposed a financial investment no one had mentioned before. When I decided to investigate it the following morning, I discovered a paper trail that connected Daniel's affair, the missing wedding money, and a shocking business deal that had been hidden from all of us. I barely slept after the dinner. Daniel's affair was no longer a suspicion. It was a fact. But what bothered me even more was his careless mention of investments. It had sounded rehearsed, like an excuse he hadn't fully thought through. By 7 the next morning, I was already sitting in my office with a notebook, listing every financial detail I could remember from the past year. Wedding expenses, cash gifts, my $20,000 check, Emily's request for another $40,000. Nothing added up. Then Tyler's words echoed in my mind. Some investments didn't work out. Investments, plural, that meant money had gone somewhere. The question was where. A little after 9, my phone rang. It was Michael Carter, my longtime business partner. Morning, Frank. Morning. You sound tired. I've had a rough week. I can imagine. There was a brief silence before he spoke again. Actually, I was calling because Daniel stopped by my office yesterday. That caught my attention immediately. He did. Yeah. Michael sounded puzzled. He asked if I'd consider investing in a construction startup. I sat up straighter. What kind of startup? I'm not completely sure. He didn't have much paperwork. He mostly talked about fast returns and expanding into residential developments. My stomach tightened. Did you invest? Michael laughed. Absolutely not. You taught me years ago never to invest in something I don't understand. I smiled faintly. I'm glad you remembered. But something else bothered me. What? He acted like he was desperate. Michael paused. I've seen plenty of entrepreneurs looking for funding. This felt different. He needed money quickly. After ending the call, I stared out the office window. So Daniel wasn't just asking me for help. He was approaching other people too. That wasn't the behavior of someone comfortably building a new marriage. That was the behavior of someone trying to cover a problem. An hour later, another unexpected call came in. Robert Mackenzie. I have an update. I'm listening. My investigator finished a preliminary background review on Daniel. I hadn't even realized he'd started one. What did he find? Nothing illegal. He paused. but there are several failed business ventures over the past 6 years. I grabbed my notebook. How many? 3. An online retail company, a landscaping partnership, and a property renovation business. Each one closed within 2 years. I wrote everything down. Were there lawsuits? No, but each business accumulated significant debt before shutting down. I leaned back in my chair. So this isn't his first financial problem. It appears to be a pattern. Mackenzie continued. My investigator also confirmed something else. What? Daniel recently applied for 2 business loans. Both were denied. I closed my eyes. Everything was beginning to connect. Failed businesses, rejected loans, a lavish wedding that generated over $100,000. Then a sudden request for another $40,000. This wasn't random. Someone was trying to stay financially afloat. That afternoon, I drove to one of my hardware stores. I needed to clear my head. As I walked through the aisles, several longtime employees greeted me warmly. One young cashier smiled. Morning, Mr. Reynolds. Morning. Your daughter stopped by yesterday. I stopped walking. Emily. Yes. She was asking about you. What exactly did she ask? The cashier looked uncomfortable. Mostly whether you'd been coming to work. She also asked if you seemed forgetful lately. A cold wave passed through me. The counselor. The family meeting. Now questions at my business. They weren't simply trying to change my mind anymore. They were quietly creating a story. A story that suggested I wasn't thinking clearly. The realization hit me all at once. If enough people believed I was becoming confused, then every legal decision I made could eventually be questioned. I thanked the cashier and walked into my office at the back of the store. For several minutes, I simply sat there. I wasn't angry. I wasn't scared. I was disappointed. Deeply disappointed. Because the people spreading those doubts weren't strangers. They were my own family. When I arrived home that evening, another envelope was waiting inside my mailbox. There was no return address. Inside was a single folded sheet of paper. 5 words had been typed across the center. Stop digging while you can. No signature. No explanation. Just a warning. I read it twice before folding it carefully and slipping it into my jacket pocket. Whoever had sent it wanted me to back away. Instead, it convinced me I was getting closer to the truth. The anonymous warning only strengthened my resolve. The next morning, Robert called with a discovery that connected Daniel to the mysterious woman from the wedding photos, and the connection would expose a secret that had been hidden long before the wedding ever took place. The anonymous note stayed in my jacket pocket all night. I must have read those 5 words a dozen times. Stop digging while you can. It wasn't just a warning. It was proof. Someone knew I was asking questions, and someone was nervous about what I might find. The next morning, my phone rang just after 8. It was Robert Mackenzie. I think we've identified the woman from the photographs. I sat upright immediately. Who is she? My investigator spent the last 2 days comparing public records, social media accounts, and business registrations. And her name is Laura Bennett. The name meant nothing to me. Do you know how she knows Daniel? Yes. Robert paused. They worked together about 7 years ago. I frowned. At the same company. No. They actually started a small home renovation business together. My grip tightened around the phone. A business? Yes. They were listed as equal partners. I walked toward the window, trying to process the information. I thought Daniel's renovation company failed. It did. But here's the interesting part. Robert's voice became more deliberate. The business dissolved after less than 2 years. Why? Financial disagreements. He continued before I could ask another question. There was also a civil lawsuit. A lawsuit. Laura claimed Daniel withdrew company funds without authorization. What happened? The case was settled privately. No admission of wrongdoing. But the partnership ended immediately afterward. I remained silent. This wasn't simply an old girlfriend. They had shared a business, shared money, shared problems. Robert spoke again. My investigator also found something else. What? Laura married someone else 3 years ago. I remembered the wedding band in the photographs. So she's married. Yes. And according to everything we found, she's still married. A married woman. Meeting Daniel behind my daughter's wedding venue. None of it made sense. If their relationship ended years ago, I asked, why would she meet him on his wedding day? We don't know. But there's another detail. I waited. They've exchanged several phone calls over the past 6 months. My heart skipped a beat. 6 months. According to publicly available phone records connected to the investigation, there was regular communication. So they never completely lost contact. Apparently not. After ending the call, I couldn't stop thinking about Laura. At first, I'd assumed the photographs revealed an emotional mistake. Now it seemed far more complicated. Old business partners. Former romantic relationship. Recent communication. It felt like pieces of 2 different stories were overlapping. Later that afternoon, I stopped by Carolyn's photography studio. She looked surprised to see me. Mr. Reynolds, I only have one question. She invited me inside. What is it? I showed her a printed photo of Laura. Do you remember seeing this woman after those pictures were taken? Carolyn studied the image carefully. Then her eyes widened. I do. You do. Yes. Not during the ceremony. But afterward. She walked over to a filing cabinet and pulled out another folder. I almost forgot about these. Inside were several wide-angle photographs from the reception. Most were ordinary shots of guests talking near the garden entrance. Then she pointed toward the background of one image. There, standing near the parking lot, partially hidden behind a row of trees. Laura. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't trying to enter the reception. She was simply watching. I stared at the image. How long was she there? I honestly don't know. I only noticed her because she seemed out of place. Carolyn zoomed in slightly. Then another detail caught my eye. Laura wasn't alone. A man stood several feet behind her. His face was partially hidden beneath a baseball cap. Can you identify him? Carolyn slowly shook her head. No, I never noticed him until now. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. One hidden photograph had exposed Daniel's betrayal. Now another suggested that someone had been quietly observing the wedding from a distance. The questions kept multiplying. Who was the man? Why were they watching? And why hadn't either of them attended the ceremony? As I thanked Carolyn and walked back toward my truck, my phone buzzed with a new text message. It was from Emily. Dad, can we meet? Alone, I need to tell you something before Daniel gets home. I read the message twice. Whatever she wanted to say. It sounded urgent. And for the first time since all of this began, it seemed possible that Emily was finally ready to tell me the truth. In the next part, Emily arrived in tears and confessed that Daniel had been hiding far more than an affair. But before she could reveal everything, an unexpected knock at the door changed the course of the entire investigation. Emily arrived 20 minutes later. She pulled into my driveway so quickly that the tires crunched loudly against the gravel. The moment she stepped out of her car, I knew something had changed. Her eyes were red. Not from anger. From crying. I opened the front door before she reached it. Dad. Her voice cracked. I need to talk to you. I silently led her into the kitchen. For nearly a minute, neither of us spoke. She wrapped both hands around a cup of coffee I'd poured for her, but she never took a sip. Finally, she whispered, "You were right." I studied her face. "About what?" "About Daniel." She closed her eyes. I confronted him after dinner. I remained silent, allowing her to continue. At first, he kept insisting the photographs didn't mean anything. She laughed bitterly. He said it was just an emotional goodbye. But I didn't believe him. She wiped a tear from her cheek. So I kept asking questions. And he finally admitted he'd been talking to Laura for months. Months. Not days. Not weeks. Months. Emily looked down at the table. He swore they weren't having an affair anymore. Anymore. She nodded slowly. They dated before we met. I knew that much. But he told me they had completely lost contact. She shook her head. That was a lie. I took a slow breath. What else did he tell you? Emily hesitated. He said Laura contacted him because she wanted money. Money. The word immediately caught my attention. For what? He wouldn't say. He just kept repeating that she was threatening to ruin everything. My mind raced. Threatening him. Over money. It sounded less like a romantic reunion, and more like unfinished business. Emily reached into her purse. I found this. She slid a folded bank statement across the table. I wasn't snooping. It fell out of his laptop case this morning. I unfolded the document. It showed a transfer made 3 weeks before the wedding. $25,000. The recipient's name had been partially hidden, but one detail remained visible. L. Bennett. Laura Bennett. I looked back at Emily. Did Daniel explain this? He claimed it was repayment for an old business debt. Do you believe him? She didn't answer immediately. Then she quietly whispered, I don't know what to believe anymore. The room fell silent. For the first time since all of this had started, I didn't see someone trying to manipulate me. I saw a daughter whose world had collapsed. She looked exhausted, embarrassed, heartbroken. Then she said something I never expected. Dad, I'm sorry. I looked at her carefully. For what? For asking you for money. For assuming you'd always fix everything. She lowered her head. I never stopped to think how unfair that was. Those words felt genuine. Not rehearsed. Not calculated. Just honest. Before I could respond, the doorbell rang. Emily looked up nervously. Were you expecting someone? No. I walked to the front door and opened it. A man in a dark gray suit stood on the porch. He appeared to be in his early 50s and carried a slim leather briefcase. Mr. Frank Reynolds. Yes, my name is Thomas Avery. He reached into his jacket and handed me a business card. I'm an attorney. I frowned. I don't believe we've met. We haven't. He glanced briefly toward the living room, where Emily was now standing. I represent Laura Bennett. Every muscle in my body tensed. What does she want? He took a slow breath. My client believes you deserve to know the truth. I exchanged a quick glance with Emily. Neither of us spoke. Mr. Avery continued. Laura has information regarding Daniel. He paused carefully. And she believes your family has been misled for quite some time. My pulse quickened. What kind of information? I'm afraid that's a conversation my client wishes to have in person. He handed me a sealed envelope. Inside is my contact information. And a proposed meeting time. I accepted the envelope but didn't open it. Before leaving, the attorney looked directly at me. Mr. Reynolds, my client isn't trying to destroy your family. She's trying to prevent another mistake. With that, he walked back to his car and drove away. Emily stared at the envelope in my hand. What if he's lying? I looked at the attorney's business card. I don't know. Then I looked back toward the driveway where his car had disappeared. But after everything we've uncovered, I wasn't willing to ignore another piece of the puzzle. Because sometimes, the person you've been told is the villain is the only one willing to tell the truth. The next morning, I agreed to meet Laura Bennett face-to-face. I expected excuses, denial, or manipulation. Instead, she placed a folder on the table containing documents that completely changed my understanding of Daniel and revealed that someone much closer to me had been hiding an even bigger secret. I hardly slept that night. The attorney's words echoed through my mind. My client isn't trying to destroy your family. She's trying to prevent another mistake. By 9 o'clock the following morning, I was sitting in a quiet cafe across town. I had deliberately chosen a public place. After everything that had happened, I wasn't taking unnecessary chances. 5 minutes later, a woman walked through the front door. I recognized her immediately. Laura Bennett. The same auburn hair. The same face from Carolyn's photographs. Only now, instead of appearing confident, she looked exhausted. She spotted me and walked over slowly. "Mr. Reynolds." I nodded. "Please have a seat." She sat down carefully and placed a thick folder on the table between us. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Finally, she broke the silence. "I owe you an apology." I looked at her without saying anything. "I never wanted to become part of your family's life." "Then why were you at my daughter's wedding?" She lowered her eyes. "Because Daniel asked me to come." That wasn't the answer I expected. "He invited you." "Not to the ceremony." She shook her head. "He wanted to meet before the wedding." "Why?" "He said he needed closure." I studied her expression. There were no dramatic tears. No attempt to gain sympathy. Just quiet regret. "So the kiss." She closed her eyes briefly. "It shouldn't have happened." I tried to leave, but Daniel kept talking about everything we'd been through together. She sighed heavily. "It was a terrible mistake." "What about after the ceremony? You were still outside." She looked surprised. "You know about that? The photographer captured you in the background." Laura nodded. I couldn't bring myself to leave. I kept hoping Daniel would come outside and tell me he'd made the right decision. And did he? No. Instead, she opened the folder. Inside were neatly organized documents. Business records. Old contracts. Bank statements. She slid one document toward me. This was our renovation company. The business registration listed both of their names. Daniel Carter. Laura Bennett. Equal owners. I already know you worked together. She nodded. Then you probably also know the business failed. I was told it did. It failed because Daniel made terrible financial decisions. She pointed to several highlighted transactions. He kept borrowing money, making promises, taking shortcuts. I flipped through the pages. There were unpaid invoices, loan notices, collection letters. He believed every new project would solve the last problem. But it never did. She looked directly at me. Eventually, the debt became impossible to manage. I remembered Robert mentioning their lawsuit. "You sued him." A sad smile crossed her face. "I didn't want to, but he emptied one of our company accounts without telling me. I had employees expecting paychecks. I had no choice." I nodded slowly. "So why contact him again after all these years?" She hesitated. Then she reached into the folder and removed another document. This. It was a repayment agreement. Daniel had signed it almost 3 years earlier. He promised to repay everything he owed me. He never did. So the $25,000. He transferred part of what he owed just before the wedding. I frowned. Only part. Laura nodded. He still owes much more. I leaned back in my chair. So you weren't trying to break up the wedding? No. I wanted him to keep his promise. She looked genuinely embarrassed. When he asked to meet that morning, I believed he was finally going to settle everything. But instead, she looked away. He kissed me. And afterward, I left. I realized he hadn't changed. For several moments, we sat in silence. Everything she had shown me matched what Robert's investigator had already uncovered. Nothing contradicted the facts. Then Laura quietly said something that caught my attention. Mr. Reynolds, there's one thing I still don't understand. What? When Daniel mentioned needing money. She paused. He never talked about paying me. He said the money was for someone else. I frowned. Someone else. She nodded. I asked who. And he refused to answer. A cold feeling settled in my stomach. If the wedding money wasn't only being used to repay old debts, then someone else had been receiving it. Someone Daniel was desperately trying to protect. As I closed the folder, my phone vibrated on the table. It was Robert Mackenzie. I answered immediately. Robert. His voice sounded unusually urgent. Frank, where are you? I'm meeting Laura. Listen carefully. He took a sharp breath. My investigator just uncovered a financial transfer made 3 days ago. From Daniel's account. Yes, it wasn't sent to Laura. My heart began pounding. Then who received it? Robert answered with 4 words that left me completely speechless. Your daughter Rachel did. In the next part, the bank records exposed a secret partnership between Daniel and Rachel that had been hidden from everyone, including Emily. As the truth unraveled, I realized the betrayal ran much deeper than a failed marriage, and the person I had trusted most had been playing both sides from the very beginning. I stared at my phone, convinced I had misheard. My daughter Rachel? I asked quietly. Robert Mackenzie's voice remained steady. Yes, there was an electronic transfer from Daniel's personal account to Rachel's account 3 days ago. How much? $15,000. I glanced across the cafe at Laura. She could tell from my expression that something had changed. I'll call you back, I told Robert. No, he replied, there's something else you need to know. I tightened my grip on the phone. The transfer wasn't labeled as a loan. It was marked as a reimbursement. The word hit me like a freight train. Reimbursement. Not a gift. Not financial help. Payment. For what? I'll meet you at my office in an hour, Robert continued. I'll have the documents ready. The call ended. Laura looked at me with concern. Is everything all right? I forced a weak smile. I'm afraid things just became even more complicated. She nodded slowly. I hope you find the answers you're looking for. As we shook hands and went our separate ways, one thought echoed in my mind. For weeks, I had assumed Daniel was manipulating my daughters. Now I wasn't sure. Maybe they had been working together all along. Robert was waiting when I arrived. Several folders covered the conference table. He slid one toward me. These came from public financial records and documents provided voluntarily during our investigation. I opened the folder. Bank transfers, account summaries, transaction dates. The $15,000 transfer was highlighted in yellow. Date 3 days earlier. Description, reimbursement. I looked up. Any idea what this was for? Robert shook his head. Not yet. But that's only the beginning. He opened another folder. This account belongs to Rachel. I frowned. How did you obtain this? It's information that became available through lawful investigative channels connected to the Financial Review. He pointed toward several deposits. Notice anything? I studied the page. Over the past 8 months, there had been multiple transfers. $2,000, $3,000, $5,000, another $2,000. Each one came from Daniel. Not Emily. Daniel. I counted quickly. More than $30,000 altogether. My chest tightened. Rachel had been telling me she couldn't afford rent. She claimed she needed a new car. She insisted she was struggling financially. Meanwhile, Daniel had been quietly sending her thousands of dollars. Why? I whispered. Robert folded his hands. We don't know, but they clearly had financial dealings that were never disclosed. A dozen memories rushed through my mind. Rachel always defending Daniel. Rachel encouraging me to help Emily financially. Rachel insisting Daniel was a wonderful husband. At the time, I thought she was simply supporting her sister. Now, it looked very different. Robert handed me another document. This is interesting. It was a copy of a limited liability company registration. The business name meant nothing to me. Southwest Property Solutions, LLC. I scanned the page. Managing member, Daniel Carter. Minor partners, Rachel Reynolds. I looked up so quickly my chair nearly tipped backward. They started a company together. Robert nodded. About 6 months before the wedding. Did Emily know? We have no evidence that she did. The room suddenly felt much smaller. 6 months before the wedding, Rachel and Daniel had quietly gone into business together. At the same time, Daniel was planning his marriage. At the same time, Emily was preparing for her future. At the same time, I was paying deposits for the wedding. Every new discovery painted the same picture. The deception hadn't begun after the wedding. It had begun long before anyone walked down the aisle. I leaned back and closed my eyes. I keep asking myself where I went wrong. Robert didn't answer immediately. Finally, he spoke. Frank, people can make dishonest choices even when they've had every opportunity to make honest ones. His words stayed with me. Maybe I hadn't failed as a father. Maybe I'd simply refused to see what was standing in front of me. As I gathered the documents to leave, my phone vibrated. It was a text message from Emily. Dad, I just found something in Daniel's home office. I don't think he knows I have it. Please come over, don't call first. I read the message twice. If Rachel and Daniel had been secretly working together. What had Emily just discovered? Whatever it was, it had frightened her enough to risk sending that message. And somehow, I knew this wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of the final chapter. In the next part, Emily handed me a locked metal box she had hidden from Daniel. Inside were contracts, handwritten notes, and one document that proved the wedding itself had been part of a carefully planned financial scheme from the very beginning. I didn't waste a second. Emily's text message was unlike anything she'd sent before. There were no explanations, no emotional pleas, just a simple instruction. Don't call first. That alone told me she was afraid Daniel might find out. 25 minutes later, I pulled into her driveway. Her car was there. Daniel's wasn't. The front door opened before I could knock. Emily quickly motioned for me to come inside. Hurry. She locked the door behind me and glanced through the front window, making sure no one had followed. You look terrified, I said. I am. She led me upstairs to Daniel's home office. Desk drawers stood open. File folders were scattered across the floor. I wasn't trying to snoop, she whispered. I was looking for our mortgage paperwork. And I found something else. She knelt beside a bookshelf and reached behind a storage cabinet. Slowly, she pulled out a small black metal lockbox. It's locked. She placed it on the desk. But Daniel left the key in his nightstand. She unlocked it with trembling hands. Inside were several neatly organized envelopes. a leather notebook, a USB flash drive, and a thick stack of legal documents. I picked up the notebook first. Every page contained handwritten notes. Dates, dollar amounts, names. Some entries appeared to be reminders. Others looked like payment records. Then one page stopped me cold. At the top, Daniel had written 3 words. Wedding budget plan. Below it were several figures. Frank wedding expenses, $70,000. Expected cash gifts, $50,000 plus. Additional contribution, $40,000. Beside the last number was a handwritten note. Ask after honeymoon. I looked at Emily. She had gone completely pale. I've never seen that before. I turned another page. There was another list. Rachel. Business account. Investment repayment. House deposit. The notes weren't detailed enough to explain everything, but one thing was obvious. Daniel hadn't been guessing. He had been planning. Months in advance. Emily covered her mouth. Oh my God. She looked physically ill. I thought the 40,000 was my idea. I slowly shook my head. I don't think it was. She sank into a chair. He manipulated me. For the first time, I believed she truly understood the extent of what had happened. I reached for the USB drive. Have you opened this? No. I was afraid to. I plugged it into my laptop. Several folders appeared. Business files, scanned contracts, financial spreadsheets. Then one folder simply labeled private. Inside were dozens of documents. Loan applications, debt summaries, emails. One spreadsheet immediately caught my attention. Its title read, Outstanding Personal Debts. The total at the bottom made my stomach tighten. $286,000. Emily gasped. That can't be right. I clicked through the individual entries. Credit cards, personal loans, private lenders, business obligations. The numbers were staggering. No wonder he had been chasing money. No wonder he wanted another $40,000. It wouldn't have solved his problems. It would only have delayed them. Then I noticed another document. Unlike the others, it wasn't financial. It was a typed agreement. Only 1 page long. There were no signatures. No official letterhead. Just a title. Future financial goals. Most of it looked like rough planning notes. Sell renovation project. Expand business. Pay outstanding loans. Then one line caught my attention. Once Frank's estate plan is known, adjust strategy accordingly. I read it again. Then a third time. Emily looked over my shoulder. What does that mean? I closed the laptop slowly. It means... I chose my words carefully. Someone expected to benefit from my estate long before I had any intention of discussing it. Emily stared at me. You think Daniel was counting on your inheritance? I don't know, but he was clearly thinking about my finances. Before either of us could say another word, we heard the unmistakable sound of a garage door opening. Emily's eyes widened. Daniel. She hadn't expected him home this early. Car doors slammed outside. Footsteps echoed through the garage. Then we heard keys rattling at the kitchen entrance. Emily quickly looked around the room. What do we do? I closed the lockbox and slipped the notebook into my briefcase. We tell him the truth. Her breathing became uneven. What if he knows I found it? The front door opened downstairs. Daniel's voice echoed through the house. Emily. His footsteps started climbing the staircase. One step at a time. Getting closer. Then they stopped. Right outside the office door. In the next part, Daniel walked into the office and found us standing beside the open lockbox. What happened over the next 15 minutes would expose every remaining lie, and force him to make a confession that no one in the family saw coming. The office door slowly opened. Daniel stood frozen in the doorway. His eyes immediately landed on the open lockbox sitting on the desk. Then he noticed the folders, the scattered papers. Finally, he looked at me. For several long seconds, nobody spoke. Emily was the first to break the silence. "We need to talk." Daniel's face lost all color. "You opened it." It wasn't a question. It was a realization. Emily nodded. "Yes." He stepped into the room and quietly closed the door behind him. His shoulders slumped as though he suddenly understood there was no point pretending anymore. "I guess," he said softly, "it was only a matter of time." I rested one hand on the notebook inside my briefcase. "Then start talking." Daniel looked at Emily. "I'm sorry." Tears immediately filled her eyes. "Don't apologize. Tell the truth." He took a slow, shaky breath. "When I met Emily, I really did love her." Emily looked away. "I know you don't believe that now." She remained silent. "But everything changed when my businesses collapsed." He sat heavily in the chair across from us. "I owed money everywhere. Banks, private lenders, former partners. I couldn't keep up. I folded my arms. So you decided to marry my daughter for money." He quickly shook his head. "No, that's not how it started." "Then explain the notebook." He closed his eyes for a moment. "The wedding was supposed to give us a fresh start. The gifts, the support, your connections. I convinced myself that if I could just survive long enough, I'd eventually pay everything back." Emily stared at him in disbelief. "So every time you smiled during our engagement, you were thinking about your debts?" He lowered his head. "I was thinking about both." She laughed bitterly. "You expected me to believe that?" He didn't answer. Instead, he looked toward me. "I never planned to hurt your family. I couldn't hold back anymore. You already did." The room fell silent again. After a moment, I asked the question that had haunted me for days. "What about Rachel?" Daniel rubbed his forehead. I knew that question was coming. Emily turned toward him. "What does Dad mean?" He looked at both of us before speaking. "Rachel approached me." Emily frowned. "What?" "Several months before the wedding." My heartbeat quickened. She said she wanted to invest in real estate. She knew I had renovation experience. "So we formed the company." Emily stared at him. "You never told me." "I know." "Why?" "Because Rachel didn't want anyone else involved." He looked ashamed. She said she wanted to prove she could build something on her own. I thought back to the business registration Robert had shown me. The dates matched perfectly. "Did she invest any money?" I asked. Daniel nodded. "A little. Not much. But most of the business never got off the ground." "So why were you sending her money?" He sighed. "Because I borrowed from her." Emily looked completely confused. "You borrowed money from my sister?" "Yes, more than once. And the $15,000. That was repayment." Everything Robert had discovered suddenly made sense. The transfers, the reimbursement label, the hidden business. But one question still remained. I looked directly at Daniel. "Did Rachel know about your affair with Laura?" He answered without hesitation. "No, absolutely not. I never told her." Emily searched his face carefully. For the first time all afternoon. I believed him. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and placed a folded piece of paper on the desk. "I was planning to give this to you tonight." I unfolded it slowly. It was a handwritten confession. Every debt, every failed business, every lie he'd told Emily about his finances. At the bottom was a single sentence: "I can't keep living like this anymore." Emily covered her face and quietly cried. Daniel looked broken. Not angry, not defensive, just exhausted. I finally understood something. Daniel wasn't an evil mastermind. He was a desperate man whose lies had grown so large that they buried everyone around him. That didn't excuse what he'd done, but it explained why everything had fallen apart. As I slipped the confession into my briefcase, my phone buzzed. It was Robert Mackenzie. I answered immediately. "Robert." His voice sounded unusually urgent. "Frank, we've got a problem." "What happened?" "It's Rachel." A long pause followed. "She just filed paperwork challenging your mental capacity." I closed my eyes. Even after everything that had come to light, the fight wasn't over. In fact, it was about to become more personal than ever. In the final part, Rachel's legal challenge forced the entire family into one last confrontation. But when the evidence was presented in court, the truth finally came out, and the future of my family changed forever. 3 weeks later, I found myself sitting in a courtroom. It wasn't where I expected to be at 68 years old. After decades of building a successful business, raising 2 daughters, and dreaming of a peaceful retirement, I was now defending something I never imagined anyone would question: my ability to make decisions about my own life. Rachel sat across the room with her attorney. She barely looked in my direction. Tyler sat quietly behind her. Emily sat beside me. She hadn't spoken much during the drive to the courthouse, but before we walked inside, she squeezed my hand. "I'm sorry, Dad." Those 3 words meant more than she probably realized. Robert Mackenzie stood as the hearing began. The judge reviewed the petition Rachel had filed, claiming I had become confused, irrational, and incapable of managing my finances. As I listened, I couldn't help thinking about the counselor Rachel had sent to my house weeks earlier. The questions at my hardware store. The conversations meant to make people doubt me. It all fit together now. This hadn't been a sudden decision. It had been building for weeks. When it was Robert's turn to speak, he remained calm. "Your Honor," he began, "the evidence will show that Mr. Reynolds continues to successfully operate 3 profitable businesses, manages his personal finances independently, and has made every legal decision with careful professional guidance." He presented business records, financial statements, meeting schedules, tax documents. Everything demonstrated the same thing: I was fully capable of managing my affairs. Then Robert introduced another piece of evidence: Dr. Melissa Harper's written assessment. The family counselor Rachel had sent to evaluate me. Her report stated there were no signs of cognitive impairment, and that I appeared fully capable of making independent decisions. Rachel's attorney shifted uncomfortably. That report alone weakened nearly every argument they had prepared. Finally, Robert handed the judge Daniel's handwritten confession. It detailed the hidden debts, the failed businesses, the financial pressure that had led to months of deception. Although it didn't excuse anyone's behavior, it explained why so many events had unfolded the way they had. The courtroom remained silent as the judge reviewed the documents. After a short recess, everyone returned to hear the decision. The judge looked directly at Rachel. "The evidence presented does not support the claim that Mr. Reynolds lacks the capacity to manage his personal or financial affairs." He paused. "The petition is dismissed." A wave of relief washed over me. Not because I had won, but because the truth had finally been recognized. Outside the courthouse, Rachel slowly approached me. For the first time in weeks, she wasn't angry. She wasn't demanding anything. She simply looked tired. "I made a mistake," she said quietly. I studied her face. There were no dramatic tears. No excuses. Just regret. I let fear make my decisions. I nodded slowly. "I hope you learn from them." She lowered her head. I know I have a lot to make up for. I hope you do. That was all I could honestly say. Forgiveness isn't something that appears overnight. It takes time. Trust takes even longer. A few months passed. Rachel moved into a small apartment she rented with money she earned from a full-time job. Tyler eventually found steady work as well. Their lives became their own responsibility. Emily filed for divorce. It wasn't easy, but she chose to rebuild her life with honesty instead of pretending everything was fine. As for Daniel, he accepted responsibility for his actions and began working to repay the debts he had created over the years. Whether he succeeded would be up to him. Some lessons can only be learned the hard way. As for me, I completed my estate plan with Robert Mackenzie. My businesses remained secure. My home stayed exactly where it belonged. Most importantly, I stopped confusing love with obligation. Helping family is a beautiful thing, but real love should never require manipulation. Generosity should inspire gratitude, not entitlement. Looking back, I don't regret the years I spent providing for my family. I only regret waiting so long to set healthy boundaries. Sometimes the hardest decision a parent ever makes is realizing that protecting your children doesn't mean protecting them from the consequences of their own choices. And strangely enough, that lesson gave me more peace than I had felt in years. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.